We are Lady Parts. Here's a little something we thought you might like.
That is me, 26, Capricorn, finishing a PhD in microbiology. And this is Lady Parts, a confused mix of hash anthems and sour girl power.
Our sound is thin. We need something more. We need lead guitarist.
We don't need a wanky, self-indulgent guitar soloist jizzing all over our songs.
It's decided.
Who would have thought that our orbits were soon to collide?
You went to St. Abigail's primary school. You played guitar in the talent show.
You got expelled for selling school furniture.
Verily 'tis I. Play something.
Play something.
Play something. I don't perform. My nervy disposition induces diarrhea and vomiting.
Ew.
I vowed I would never perform again, but Lady Parts had other plans.
She's our guitarist.
It was kind of like therapy, but with a lot of screaming.
Hey, you got a problem with my lyrics?
You could do less, more. Hey!
To our newest band member, a delightful freak show, and our great new friend.
Hey!
Am I really that bad?
You're that good.
We're sisters. Our music is about representation. It's about being heard.
You're in a punk band?
Yes, Ma.
And you haven't been... Or...
This is us, by us, for us.
Oh, yeah.
My name is Zarka.
Zarka, so exotic.
I sell white people, brown people things. Ka-ching! Zarkish delights.
What kind of a person are you?
I'm not a liar. I'm a schemer. I've got a plan.
Your plans never work out.
What's wrong with me?
Oh, I've been waiting years for you to ask me that. He's getting remarried.
Oh, my ex is making me even more crazy by marrying a white yoga instructor half his age in 1 week.
Mama, what are you doing?
I told everyone online I'm coming to the wedding with Brian.
Who's Brian?
You just made up a white brain surgeon named Brian, and then suddenly that exact person matched you on a dating site?
I have so many ideas for our dates.
Dates?
There's something else going on here.
Muslim, eh? What's that about?
We haven't been introduced.
He's no one.
I'm her boyfriend.
Now I know why white women don't bring guys home.
You are old and have no guys to bring.
I'm winning!
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Muslim Women in the Writers' Room, the first of 3 special online events highlighting the contributions of actors, writers, and directors, bringing a diverse perspective to the film and television industries. I'm Faiza Hirji, an Associate Professor of Communication Studies and Media Arts at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, and I'm thrilled to have the privilege of introducing this unique event and our speakers today. Before I proceed with introductions, I want first to acknowledge that although we are meeting virtually today, and I thank all of you for being here, many of us are speaking, watching, and listening on lands that belong to Indigenous peoples, and we gratefully acknowledge both the privilege and the responsibility of living, working, and learning on these territories. I would like to draw your attention to the upcoming events in this series. Muslim Women Behind the Lens will be live streamed on Monday, March 16th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and Acting Muslim Representing Our Authentic Selves will take place on Sunday, May 29th at 1 p.m. also Eastern Time. All of these events have been made possible through our generous sponsors, the Bell Fund and Creative Saskatchewan. These events are also being brought to us through the apparently endless creative energy of the actor and writer Zarka Nawaz and her team. Zarka is perhaps best known to many of us for her creation of the pioneering series Little Mosque on the Prairie, which premiered in 2007 to record ratings on CBC television and arguably helped open the door to more diverse offerings on Canadian television. Zarka is the author of a best-selling memoir, Laughing All the Way to the Mosque. Her novel, Jamila Green Ruins Everything, is now available. And her CBC Gem web series, Zarka, premiered yesterday, so I encourage you to check that out. I had a chance to take a look at it, and I definitely recommend it if you're looking for entertainment that is unexpected, funny, and clever. My own work looks at the representation of race and religion in the media, particularly as it concerns Islam and South Asians. And I was fascinated by the way that Zarka manages to subvert the audience's expectations, using a divorcee's revenge fantasy to bring in commentary on privilege, unreasonable expectations for South Asian women and for relationships, racial and economic hierarchies, ageism, Islamophobia, and the fundamental similarities among different religions. And all of this happens in a few very short episodes, which is no easy writing feat. Our other participant today, Nida Manzoor, is similarly no stranger to the challenges and joys of writing engaging comedy. Nida is a British television and film writer and director, best known for creating, directing, and writing the Channel 4 comedy series We Are Lady Parts. Nida's work has been acknowledged by the BAFTA TV Craft Awards, the Rose d'Or, the Broadcasting Press Guild, and the Royal Television Society Program Awards. Nida started her career as a runner and has directed episodes of BBC Three's Enterprise and Doctor Who, and she recently wrapped production on her debut feature film, Polite Society, so we can add that to our upcoming viewing list. At this pivotal and exciting moment in film and television, with calls for increased diversity and representation that reflects the audience and presents different narratives than the standard media stereotypes and caricatures, it's important to highlight the work that these writers have already been doing in this regard. I hope that everyone will take the time to check out their current and future projects. And now, Zarka, I'm going to turn it over to you to get the conversation started.
Thanks so much, Faiza. Nida, this is so exciting. I was watching the trailers and it was just like, wow. There's probably people out there going, why can't they just make shows about nice Muslim women who are good and just follow?
Oh my God, so true. And I was just so enjoying watching your show. It's hilarious. Thank you for sharing it. It's so cool.
I think it's so interesting. I feel like I'm a generation above you in terms of age, because I'm much older than you. And I feel like, but we have so many similarities in our past. Like I was reading about you, and you have a degree from University College London in politics. And I was reading on your Wikipedia page that your parents thought you were going to be a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly that. You know, I did the thing where I told my parents I'm getting a proper job, and then I panicked. I moved out. I got a job as a runner, and I sort of told them I was trying to get into film, which didn't go down so well initially, but they've come around to it in recent years.
Tell me,
was it the same
when
for
you said
you?
you were? Yeah, my parents thought I was going to be a doctor. I actually have a degree in science, a BSc from the University of Toronto.
Oh my God.
And also, I just like you, I was like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to do this, and I don't know what to do. And I think it scared them because it was, in those days, there were no role models in television. There was we hadn't heard of anybody Muslim who had gone into making there were no television shows. And it was a hard road to hoe. And I wanted to ask you, what was it that made you want to pick filmmaking? What was there a spark? Was there some sort of inspiration?
That's really interesting. I think I joined the Film Society at my university when I was doing my politics degree and not loving it. And then I thought I was going to do make hard-hitting documentaries. And, I tried that, didn't work out. You've got to have some really, tough kind of trying to get to the truth, which I didn't really have. I much preferred sitting on my own and writing comedies. So yeah, it was at university where I was kind of exploring that as it was part of the Film Society. And then when I graduated, I was like, oh no, how do I, pivot into film and television? And I had no idea. But, in the UK, we've got a lot of great sort of public funded schemes and programs and stuff. So I managed to get onto a couple of those and sort of find my way in, working kind of as a runner and just get some experience in the industry that way. Yeah, I think that's kind of how it all started.
So when you say a runner, what does that mean?
So I worked in a post-production company. So after the films are shot, just for anyone who's watching who may not know the ins and outs, after you shoot something, it goes into post, And essentially in the UK, the post house is where it gets edited and graded. And I was working there making tea, essentially. As a runner, you're like bottom rung. In the UK, it's like tea. Everybody wants a tea. And I was making those teas, making sure the kitchen was stocked. It was very, it was not what my parents had dreamt for me to be, essentially, like, but it was cool because I got to see, behind the scenes of how stuff was getting made. And I was making my short films on the side, and I could do all the post-production at the post houses I was working at, and, use the other runners who wanted to get to the industry. So it was really good for me to like kind of see how it all is put together.
That's so interesting because that's very similar to my story. I started off making short films because I didn't know what kind of filmmaker I was. And I thought, like, just like you, I was going to make hard-hitting documentaries. And I did make one and realized, oh no, this is not for me. I don't belong here. Tell me about your journey in the short film world. Like, I find that fascinating. I've never heard you talk about that before.
Yeah, no, I think making those short films really helped me find my voice as a writer, and like the stylistic visual style that I wanted to go for as a director as well. So, I made one that was totally no budget, that got into a few festivals, and then that helped me get one that got a bit of funding from the UK Film Council. And they're comedy, they're silly comedy, female led. But it just really helped me hone my voice. So that's kind of where it all sort of started, was those short films, really. And then I got to work in UK TV as a sort of writer on some kids TV shows. And then I started to get a few gigs directing other people's comedies. So other writer performers in the UK, I was doing like their pilots, and just kind of came on board as a director. So I was kind of quite lucky that I was able to push a few fronts and kind of gain little increments of experience before Lady Parts happened.
It was fascinating you're telling us the story, because a lot of people are listening going, how do I become like Nida Manzoor? How do I become, a creator of such an incredible series? But they don't realize that it's a long, role of picking up skills and learning what you're good at yourself. At what point did you know that comedy was your, that you wanted to make comedies instead of saying serious, hard-hitting dramas?
I think pretty early on, like trying the hard-hitting documentary thing and just being like, I mean, so much love for people who can do that, but it was just like I was not having a good time. And then I was just sort of following my joy, I think, and just writing comedies was where it's at. Like I was trying to get into writing UK sort of soaps, because that's, people say like that's a kind of a good first way in. And what I had to do is do a trial episode. So they send you what they want the script to be, a outline, and then you have to write an episode of, for me, it was EastEnders. So just like a big, UK returning soap that's been going on for like, decades and decades. So I tried to write an episode of this. It's quite a serious, like tough, soap, but I just kept writing it as like a sitcom. So they were like, we really liked your episode, but you're not writing the show. So I was like, okay, I had to like not go down that route. And I said writing kids TV allowed me to be much sillier. I just was like, I really like being silly. So that was pretty early, actually. I was like, yeah, I wanted to do comedy, which is why it was so weird when I was like, as a new writer, being asked to write very serious stuff. I had a few meetings where I was being asked to look at, identity of Muslim women, but can you look at it from an honor killing perspective? And what, whereas like the industry was wanting me to look at, being a Muslim woman, but in a very narrow representation as like long suffering, and that's what made me kind of create or develop the idea for We Are Lady Parts, because I was like, all my spec scripts, everything I've written, all my short films are comedy, yet you want me to write this drama and you want me to tell this very specific story, which portrays Muslim women as just in one-dimensional, suffering, oppressed. And I was so shocked that this was happening, that's what kind of drove me to write and create We Are Lady Parts. It was a sort of frustration there. I know that wasn't your question, but I'm like, that's kind of how that the whole idea came from.
No,
did you find that as well?
Yes. People keep wanting me to write, very serious fathers who are mean to their daughters, and I'm like, why? I remember when I wrote my memoir, Laughing All the Way to the Mosque, I had a critic come up to me and go, I don't understand, where are the sad parts? and I'm like, what are you talking about? I go, Tina Fey, when she wrote her, biography, would never have been asked, where are the sad parts? And I said, my father was a loving, caring human being who supported me. Why can't you see that in my life? Because they can't see fathers like that raising daughters who are empowered. They like there's whole use of Taliban, Afghanistan, Al Qaeda. Like they have such a narrow vision of what our lives are like.
So true. So true.
And your father, I read about, like he taught you music, guitar lessons, and brought the whole issue of musicality into your life. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, he got me a guitar when I was like 8. He was really into guitar music, but also into like, Pakistani Qawwali music. And I just grew up in a very kind of art-loving household. And that a lot of that came from him, and my mum. They were both really into like, Persian and Urdu poetry, as well as like my dad was massive Simon Garfunkel fan. Like there wasn't any, which is also why I was so excited to make this show, because you're always presented as like us and them. It's sort of like you're either Eastern or West. There isn't, whereas I felt like I grew up in a very, just culturally rich household where nothing was put in opposition. Everything was, all culture was to be explored. And that's how I was raised. So I remember like that being something I really wanted to show in the show, with like Amina's parents being kind of fun and silly and loving her music and being encouraging, because again, like you say, we just don't get to see that. And it's really interesting how like the industry, especially earlier, I think it's, for me in the UK, it's changed, but it was wanting to repeat those tropes of like, your parents being at loggerheads with your parents and they don't support you or believe in you, and that being the one narrative. And they wanted us to participate in like just kind of repeating that, but which is not to say that that doesn't exist, but that was just the only thing that felt like the industry was wanting, which was why I was like, nah, I'm gonna go in hard with this comedy.
No, you're saying exactly what I've been saying, is that of the the spectrum of Muslim experiences, we only see that sliver, and I'm sure it does exist, but what about the 99% of the other stories that we never see? And if you don't show them, that's what reinforces the stereotypes of Muslims as being this one type of person. But it's going to take people like us and people who are creating to tell those stories, because it's not going to happen if we don't do it. And I think it's not coincidental that you and I both come out of countries that have the BBC and the CBC, and they're nationally funded organizations whose mandate is to support artists. And they gave both of us a chance to break out, and have massive hits that have allowed Hollywood to sort of open their eyes and say, people are willing to watch these shows with Muslims acting like this other type of Muslim that we've never seen or been exposed to before. But I don't think they could have done it on their own. It had to have been Muslims who lived that experience to reflect that experience.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. We have for all its flaws, we've got amazing public funded channels here that do kind of think about cultural richness, and so I think that's definitely something I've benefited from as well. Yeah.
So now I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the criticism that we've both gotten for our work in the Muslim community.
Yay.
I've never been able to talk to anyone about this.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. But I'll tell you what happened to me. It was 2007 when Little Moslem Prairie came out. There was no Facebook, no social media. It didn't exist at the time.
Oh, okay.
So the only way people could reach you was through blogs or by phoning you or confronting you. And my husband, which was scarier. So my husband was the president of the Islamic Association at our mosque. And it was Jummah prayer that Friday, and I had come and my show had aired. And all of a sudden, my husband texts me and he goes, don't leave the mosque right now, because people are really mad. And, people were yelling at him and they're like, this is a shameful show and you should divorce your wife and you should. And I remember just being like shocked because I couldn't understand it. I was like, what is happening? Like, this show is about Muslims and it's a positive depiction. And people have told me for years, we need more Muslims in the arts to, but what I didn't anticipate was that comedy isn't always a universal medium for different generations of people. That people like from my parents' generation didn't understand the comedy, and that there were people who felt that Islam and Muslims, you just can't be comedic about that issue. And that if you are, then you're making fun of Islam or the divine. And I was like, you can make fun of Muslims and Muslims can make fun of each other, but that's not the same as making fun of Islam. And they couldn't distinguish between the two. And then there was just a generation of people who just couldn't understand the comedy and were worried that I was insulting Islam. And there was just this disconnect. And then there was another group of people who just wanted Muslims to be shown as perfect people, not making any mistakes, and did not want flawed characters. And all this came down on me at once. And I remember having to withdraw my membership from the mosque and kind of go dark in the community and lay low. And it took a few years for things to kind of settle out and for people to realize nothing catastrophic had happened, that non-Muslims were not watching the show going, oh, those are terrible Muslims. We've always known the truth. That in fact, what was happening was people were coming up to Muslims at work going, I love that show. It's so funny. I can finally relate to Muslims. Those characters are like characters in my, my church or my soccer association. And you guys are just like us. And eventually the fear calmed down and people relaxed. And now, I get all these accolades and I'm like, but you guys, back in those days, it was very different. I wanted to talk to you about your experience with We Are Lady. What happened?
Zach, I've got to say, like, massive props to you making that show. It's such a groundbreaking show. It's definitely like, paved the way for people like me to come in and have that confidence. And just hearing your experience, it just sounds like, I can't even imagine what that must have felt like for you. I've not had anything near that sort of, maybe like people don't come up to me, they just slide into my DMs and tell me I'm the worst, which is fine. I'm not on social media anymore. I sort of kind of stepped off it. And, I had a really mixed experience. I had that sort of both sides of like really gushing love from, young Muslims, older Muslims, and then the polar opposite as well, which I just found really interesting. But also like, it's really, whoa, it's like, again, I sort of was like a little bit shocked, but then I'm like, why was I so shocked? You kind of, as you're writing something, you get so swept up in your own characters and stories, and it represents you so much that of course it won't speak to everyone. I realize that, but it was just really interesting to see the kind of how many different reactions there were by, different kinds of Muslims. So I found it to be, initially like really quite tough to deal with. And it's definitely something, it's weird. It like made me like, I had to like reparent myself, because I realized I sort of socialized, even though my show is quite rebellious, I've been sort of socialized to sort of not upset the apple cart, be the good girl. And I found it really difficult to deal with the fact that I'd create something that not everybody was loving. And I was like, I'm not being a good girl. I'm done. I'm just like, I was like super triggered. I was like, oh gosh, okay, I got issues, got to work on myself. Got to figure out some stuff. I wish that like, as we support new writers coming through, part of it is like how to deal with criticism, how to like, create art that is meaningful, but not be swayed by whether or not everyone's going to like you or not like you, and just prepare the ground for what it's like to deal with criticism. Because I don't know if you found, like, one of the questions I'm asked whenever I do panels or anything by, often young Muslim women who want to write, it's just like, how do you do it when, there's this pressure to represent, and what if you don't please everyone? And the fear of that, I feel like, can be so debilitating. And it's one of the things that I wish that it was something that could be talked about more. And which is why I think hearing from you, and it's, it is a rough ride sometimes, but it is ultimately such joy. We're still here, we're still doing it, is because we get to have that expression, the joy of the expression. But, I also feel so lucky. I have, such supportive friends and family, and it kind of grounds you to the people you love. And but it is rough sometimes. It's rough when someone doesn't think you're funny, as well as someone thinks that you're like doing some really bad stuff. It's a lot. But ultimately for me, I was able to put that into the work, that question, that kind of the feeling of, my characters are criticized for their music. So I was able to then weave how different characters, how they react, and what I was going through back into the show, which was also like deeply cathartic, but it felt like something that, I wanted to that was kind of in the atmosphere that people wanted to talk about.
No, I hear you. I feel like the only advice I can give you is that sometimes it takes people a year or two to catch up with the work and understand what you've done. And I remember Rami had gotten a lot of criticism for his show, and I remember direct, DMing him going, "Don't worry about it. It's gonna be okay." When Little Mosque came out, I had the exact same criticism, and he was like, "I can't." He goes, "For Little Mosque, where nobody was having sex." He goes, "What could they possibly criticize?" I'm like, dude. I had a husband and wife kissing, and I was like followed in a park going, "We don't do that." And I'm like, "What, kiss?" It's like, "No, it's forbidden." And I was like, where? I mean, what I understood later was that culturally people didn't see it in their communities, and therefore they assumed it was inappropriate now to see on television. And it was so funny. Like I had one of my friends said her husband would watch, movies with Angelina Jolie, but when there was like this, moment where a white man almost kissed the Muslim lead, he went screaming, running out of the living room because he couldn't handle it when it was his own people. When it was his own people, he was like, "No, it can't happen to my people." And I was like, wow. So like, it's a different standard.
My gosh,
But
yeah.
it's okay. I think you're ahead of your time, and eventually people catch up to that representation, and then they move on to the next show, and then they're like that show. Because I remember, what is it, Citizen Khan? There was a show called Citizen Khan.
Yeah.
And oh my God, the comments were, what is horrifying. I cannot, stand this. And then one person goes, "Not as respectful as Little Mosque on the Prairie." And I was laughing, going, "Oh yeah." So I feel like each one of us builds upon the next one, and then takes hits for the next person. But what I wanted to say was, speaking of Citizen Khan, I just had an interview yesterday, and they were talking about how great Muslim representation is. We've got like Rami and Hassan Minaj and Aziz Ansari and Gul from Man Like Mobeen and Riz Ahmed, and finally had to stop the journalist and said, "You realize those are all men." Right? You have just mentioned a litany of Muslim men, and then she's like, "Oh yeah, that's right. Where are the women?" And I'm like, "That's a good question." So I got to ask you, why so many men and why so few women? Do you know?
I don't know. I'm merely a TV writer, comedy writer, so I haven't got the academic knowledge. I'm sure one of the academics could say better, but the patriarchy is real, I suppose. It takes us, men are kind of elevated and not torn down in the same way women are. That's not to say it would have been easy for any of those men to kind of go forward and speak their truth, but I just feel like I can only speak for myself, but I was really just nervous about upsetting the apple cart. I was, again, like, there weren't a lot of other women doing it ahead of me. But, I have a lot of excitement for the generations that are coming up now. There's a kind of boldness, and there's a kind of awareness and a thoughtfulness and an excitement that I'm sort of feeling from the writers that I'm meeting, the newer writers and stuff. There's a kind of confidence as well, which is really exciting, among women, Muslim women as well. So it feels like there's an exciting shift happening, and that there are kind of exciting new voices coming through. But why there's, I don't know. Zarka, do you know? Why so much a sausage fest? Don't know.
I'm wondering like, a lot of people come getting into this industry is a really tough industry to break into. And I wonder sometimes, like a lot of stand-ups, like, Aziz Ansari and Rami, like I'm wondering if they, just because of cultural reasons, were able to break out into the stand-up world first. Maybe. And because now I'm seeing a lot more Muslim women in the stand-up world.
Yeah.
And like Salma Hindi and Yasmin Al-Hadi, like I'm seeing a lot of more women, and I feel like we will see a transition happen somewhere there. And like you said, a lot of from our, maybe there's a sense of, I don't want to upset the apple cart, because you will upset the apple cart when you make a comedy about Muslims. You will, and there's not much you can do about it. And it's a tough, like you need so much support and so much strength and so much courage, and it's tough to break out into this business. I don't think we can explain to people just how hard it is. But I'm hoping that you are a trailblazer for women out there who, we are Lady Parts. It's such an incredible show. I wanted to talk more about that. I remember when I was making Little Mosque on the Prairie costume and clothing, was such a big deal to me because what I desperately, desperately, desperately wanted was to get away from this Muslim women just wear all black. I said to the costume designer, not a single, I don't want to see, I want to see color and beauty. And I want the hijabs to be like incredibly glorious. Tell me about your work with the costume designer in the show.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, equally, wanting the Muslim women to look beautiful and unique and individual, it was something that was so important to me. And my costume designer, PC Williams, who is just, I wanted to work with her because she's a stylist. So she's like, she's 1,000 times cooler than anyone I've ever met. And she just was able to like, we together were thinking about like, what are the identities of each woman, not only as like, how would they wear the hijab, but what are their interests? Like, where are they? What are the particularities of their background? If Aisha's Iraqi, we brought some Iraqi elements, but she's also kind of goth. So we had the goth t-shirt. It was just like, it was a really exciting collaboration to come up with the costume. And even a character like Syra, who doesn't wear hijab, but we're like, well, she's the lead singer. We only gave her like 12 items of costume because we're like, she probably doesn't wash a lot. She just wears the same thing again and again. So it was like this very kind of thoughtful of like what, not only like, who are these women as Muslims? It's like, who are they as like people, and like what are their personalities? And like you said, like I wanted the show to have an aspirational quality, or just to celebrate these women. It's not like, aren't they serious and suffering? Like, don't they look badass? Like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna have Momtaz do a slow-mo walk through a market looking like a badass because yeah, why not? Why don't we get that Tarantino treatment? So it was always thinking about how can I make them look super cool or super geeky or nervous, and just give that whole kind of plethora of ways of being to all the characters. So I mean, that's partly with costume, but how we shot them, how we lit the characters, how they were together, and showing like Amina's university friends that we had a very different color palette for, who were kind of all in these pastels, all looking fabulous as well, but in a very different kind of fabulous to the band. So it was just wanting to show the richness, or at least like a glimpse of what the richness can be, but in a really fun way. So it was just like, yeah, it was just so much fun coming up with the world and conceiving of everything. Yeah.
That was incredible. What I noticed a lot about We Are Lady Parts is you have a very strong visual style. Like you had spent a long time, because you had directed the whole series, right?
Yeah.
And I noticed that, and I had listened to a lot of your interviews, that you draw upon visual styles from other films. And I wanted you to talk about that because you can see it so much in that show. Like, it's so beautifully choreographed.
Thank you. Thanks so much for saying that. Yeah, I think I had a real kind of vision for what I wanted it to look like and feel like. And, with comedy, it's all about rhythm, and there's music in the show. It's just thinking about the rhythm of how we move between scenes, the comedy of, like, for example, whenever I was shooting Syra, my DOP and I, we decided with Syra, because she's a bit more of a volatile character, a bit more unpredictable. We were always handheld with her. She's kind of a bit more like a tortured soul, whereas Amina is trying to keep everything together. So we're very like stylized. It was all central framing. It was all steady cam track. It was never handheld. So we, except for when their worlds sort of collided with each other. So we sort of had very, I don't know, it's just all part of the storytelling, thinking about the visual style, and it sort of adds that element of the other layer of storytelling. I think more than just the dialogue is like, okay, how can we enhance it with how we film them, how we light them, and that was also a conversation with my production designer, and Simon, who built the kind of the bedsit. Syra's bedsit was such a kind of important set for the characters, and we kind of filled it with stuff that really felt true to the characters. And so it was just, yeah, the visual style is just important for me as a filmmaker, I suppose. Just conceiving of the full world.
That's so fascinating that you're telling me this, because I have never heard you talk about that. Because you've never gone technically to a directing school. So you're talking as someone who's studied this. How did you learn all of
Oh,
these things?
I think I just watched a lot of films, so it's weird with directing. You realize you don't actually need any learnt skill. It's just like just having idea of what you like, and I would put, when I was pitching the show, I would put loads of images together of from Instagram of people, just like of a collage of what I wanted the show to feel like, and so like having, I feel like as a director, all you need is an idea of what the aesthetic is, and then working with like a designer who knows how to translate that, a DOP, a director of photography, a cinematographer who, when you're telling them about the show, can be like, oh, we should shoot it like this. And I kind of was, I suppose I was learning from all my other heads of department, and as a director, your job is just to know what you want and be able to communicate that. And I think that's something that I also think is important, is demystifying what a director does, because it's actually kind of, I feel like anyone can do it. It's just knowing what you want and finding the people who can help you get it. And so it's weird. I don't feel like I've suffered from not having gone to film school. It would have been so cool not to have been doing politics because I was bored and doing film. But I realized actually you can shadow someone on set and like and be with them for like a day and you've got it. You're like, oh, that's why I like bringing new directors onto the set to come and watch, because then it's mainly to be like, oh, right, anyone can do this. You just, speak to the actors, speak to the camera, and you just know what you want. It's quite, I don't know. I feel like, yeah, it's pretty straightforward once you see it, I think.
I think this is fascinating for people who are thinking about getting into television making, or they don't realize how important these pitch documents are and how important it is to go and reference shows and visuals. Tell me about, I was listening to you talk once about how detailed your pitch document was when you pitched this to the BBC and how important that document was, because you had it very detailed. Can you tell me about that process?
Yeah, I think with We Are Lady Parts, I decided to go in really hard just because I'd felt I'd had these sort of annoying meetings where I was being asked to sort of show Muslim women in this one light. So I was like, okay, I want to make this show, and I don't want anyone to mess with it, because if that fear that the production company is going to come in and make you want to make it a drama, or they're like, ooh, wanting to make it grittier or more of this or that. So I just went in hard with images, with this is what all the characters look like, with little kind of bios of each of them. And I just wanted to fill it with as much detail as I could. So anyone who greenlit it was saying like, yes to this document. So I'm like, because this is what I want to create. I don't want it to be messed with. So for me, it's important for me, because I was like, I got to position myself as like, I'm the key creative on this. So it's in case, the fear of being kind of turfed out for someone more experienced who isn't from your background, who will do it instead. So it was quite an empowering document for me as well, because then I could take it to places, and if people were like, oh, we want this, that, and the other, and I could just be like, okay, not for you. It was weird. I really like, I was all of a sudden like a badass, even though I should have just gone for whoever would say yes. But yeah, I really wanted to do it right, which sort of, that desire just empowered me to be like, oh, you don't get it. I don't want to do it with you. And it was kind of great, because when I ended up finding like the perfect people who were just like supportive, considerate, thoughtful. Like the collaborators on the show were just so right. And I was so glad I didn't settle for people who were just like wanting me to change it. Because then I got to make the show in the way that I kind of always dreamed of it of being, but actually better because of all these incredible collaborators.
Speaking of collaborators, I come from the world in the US and Canada, we have large writing rooms. Like for Little Mosque, I mean, it's small for Canada because we don't have the budgets that you do in the US, but we range from 6 to say 9 writers, and we had huge, like 20 episodes a season. Like they were like giant, and it would take like 6 months to work, and we worked communally as a group, and it was hard for me at the beginning because we didn't have Muslim writers. I would have to tell all these white people, this is my community. I would have to take them to field trips to the mosque, and but to generate idea after idea after idea, and after a few years we got a more diverse room. We had another Muslim writer, and it started to getting a little easier. But it's such a different model from what I've heard in Britain, that usually it's a single writer model. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, it's changing, but traditionally it's been like, I think the idea of it's like a very authored work, you know, a show like Fleabag or Chewing Gum are kind of all written by Phoebe Waller-Bridge or all by like Michaela Cole, and that was just the model of what we've been doing, but the UK is sort of following the US and opening up into big writers' rooms. And also in the UK, we used to have, you know, really short series, like you would be like 6.5 hours and that was it. Whereas like in the US, it's like you've got to generate so much story. So for me, I had a writer's room for 2 days with a bunch of other sort of young Muslim creatives I was just really like, you know, some of them were just really good friends. Some of them were just people I was really inspired by. And we kind of workshop some of the ideas. But, you know, other than that, there was like 6.5 hours and I was still like, not sure. I was still finding my voice in the process of writing the show. I don't know if you found that. I was surprised by, as I was writing, like what it became, because it starts out like a really fun kind of sitcom-y, and then the tone shifts a bit. And I kind of didn't see that coming when I started writing that, and that's why I was like, I got really lucky to get to kind of see it through in that way. But I think you know, what I'm excited about is learning about doing writers' rooms, because of, you know, how much more you can get and how cool it is to have that collaboration. But yeah, it's a different culture, but I definitely think the UK is coming closer to the US now as well.
Well, I mean, kudos to you to be able to pull something like that off and be a single writer. It's hard. It's so hard. That's why I'm very impressed, because I know what it's like.
Yeah.
I mean, when you get into, like, I know what it's like when you fall into that plot hole, you're like, how do I get out? How do I solve this? And then you have to do it by yourself. The fact that you did it by yourself is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I had great script editors and producers, and, you know, like the network, Peacock for us and Channel 4 are always feeding in notes on the draft. So I was getting so much input, which always helped actually when I kind of got over, you know, when you kind of start accepting notes and not being like, too many people, actually just hearing where it's not working for people was like really helpful. So I always felt like I had someone, you know, to kind of bounce off on.
And that brings me to my next question. So Peacock is streaming in the US on NBC. Do you find it a different experience dealing with American executives instead of just British executives? Like, has there been any difference?
It was interesting because I had no idea how it was going to go down. I was quite nervous. You know, people like, oh, letting those cowboys in. I was like, I don't know. But actually, Peacock were pretty great. I've got to say, like, very respectful, very thoughtful in their notes, very supportive of the show. And like, I was, you know, and equally Channel 4 in the UK, it was like really just a lot of people empowering me. So again, I think I got really lucky. I don't think it's always the way. But it was really, yeah, it wasn't the culture shock I was expecting. But then I realized, you know, that the show is actually more universal maybe than I even thought. You know, I always know like, oh, it's a show about a character finding their voice. That's a universal story, but I didn't quite know how wide the reach would be for the show. So when people were feeding back, it felt like, oh, I'm not doing something really niche, actually. It's a human experience, duh. But it took me a while to realize, like, oh, cool, this can be for everyone.
Tell me about second season. What's happening with the second season? Has it been shot? Like, where are you in production?
No, it's still early days. We recently greenlit, so it's just kind of coming up with ideas. We're gonna, you know, start shooting. You know, not quite yet. Still a while away, but yeah, it's still very, very early doors on that. But I'm so excited to kind of dive back in. I'm just finishing the film at the moment, and then I'll be starting.
Can you tell me about your film?
I can. It's sort of, you know, action comedy set in a sort of British Pakistani family about a teenage girl who's sort of trying to be a stunt woman and so it's got all this fun heightened action in it, and it's again just like a silly comedy about these two sisters. So again, it was just like leaning into the things I love to do and kind of getting a slightly bigger canvas to kind of tell the story on.
And when can we see that?
Well, we don't have a release date yet.
Okay.
I'm just finishing it off, and so I'm not sure. I think the studio is going to figure out when it's not up against like a massive Marvel film or whatever. But it should be out in cinemas, and then it'll be streamed as well, hopefully, if it all goes well.
Speaking of massive Marvel films, Ms. Marvel, the first Muslim female superhero, is coming out next month on Disney Plus.
I'm so excited about that. Like, I was in love with those comics when I read them, and I just think it's gonna be. I love the character, so I'm hoping it's gonna be epic, and I'm so excited for it.
So finally, we'll get more Muslim women joining us. I was going to say to you, I've never felt drawn. I thought I was going to be drawn to directing, but somehow I found myself drawn to acting, weirdly enough. Have you ever felt a pull to act?
No, I don't think I felt that pull. I just was so in love with the writing, became such a passion, and I felt like directing kind of was just a kind of extension of writing, of just following the vision through. But acting, no, yeah, that never was something that was exciting to me. I did enjoy acting at school, and I sort of enjoy maybe like poetry and stand up and stuff, but I think like proper acting, I just actors, I don't know, it's so like you're putting yourself properly in the spotlight, and that seems quite terrifying. So I don't think I quite have the nerve for that.
Well, see, I wanted to talk to you about one of my favorite songs. Honor Kill My Sister is a very provocative title. Can you tell me why you chose that title?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it came from, I was so frustrated about being asked to write dramas about Muslim women, long suffering, and this narrative, but like the only Muslim woman experience is like this honor killing experience. So I was like, I'm gonna write a comedy song, and I wrote it with my sister, and the lyrics are like, I'm gonna honor kill you for stealing my shoes or whatever, and it was just like taking the power back and being like, we can be funny, we can be silly, we're not just this one serious thing that you've portrayed us in. So it was definitely like a response to this kind of, it's almost like a pornographic, desire to see the Muslim woman like die. It was just so messed up that it was a kind of in reaction to that, and it was really fun to get to write the song with my sister and like have a fun time. I mean, I remember we were writing this song, we were recording like a temp audio for it, and we were recording it in her flat in Berlin, and like people were like, someone came knocking and was like, somebody's trying to kill their sister, and we're like, no, we're just singing the song. Sorry. But it's again like being satirical, using comedy, and it feels somehow like, Zarka, this is something that you do so well. It's like, just using comedy as a kind of is such a, like, I don't know, an empowering tool. I find it's just like, oh, you can be silly, you can be funny, you can, Muslim women can do this. And they do, and that felt for me like such like the one thing I wanted to do. So one thing I told myself when I was writing it is like, I just want to write this, and I want it to be really funny, because that in itself felt like would be a win if I could pull that off, because we just don't get to be funny. We're just like super serious. And it's like, no, none of my friends are super serious. My parents aren't serious. It's like the silliness, and that's what kind of is, I think very humanizing to see us all be silly.
Okay, I'll give you my story, because when
yes,
I have a similar story. So I wrote a novel, and I'll show it to you, but it's a satire about ISIS, and I didn't want to call them ISIS, and I wanted to do exactly what you're saying, is the only way to take the power away from the sort of demonology that has been created around Muslims is to change the name ISIS. So I call them the Dominion of the Islamic Caliphate and Kingdom, and I named my book The Rise and Fall of Dick. And I got away with it until almost the end of publishing. And then they said to me, no, we won't let you keep, we'll let you keep they can be called Dick, but we won't let you keep the title of the book at The Rise and Fall of Dick, because it's a comedy about a Muslim woman who accidentally joins an ISIS-like group and brings them down through incompetence. So they said, the marketing people, every time we Google that title, like we get images, no. And so they made me change. I'll show you. They made me change it to Jamila Green Ruins Everything. And the original title was the Rise and Fall of Dick. And my children were like heartbroken, right? They were just like, oh no. And I said, okay, I'm going to adapt this for television. And when I do, I'll bring back
you'll bring it back.
Title.
Yes.
But that was what I want. Exactly what you're saying is that I wanted to take away the power and the fear and the demonology that's constantly swirling about with the terminology having to do with Muslims or anything to do with our community, and suck it out. And the way to do it is through satire and comedy. It's there's like the greatest power.
Speaking of
power.
I'm so sorry to break in on this conversation. I feel like I could listen to this all day, and I have plenty of questions and comments of my own. I think we could probably spend at least a couple of hours on the comment that the patriarchy is real. I definitely agree with. But what you just said, Zarka, I think actually ties in really well to a question we received from the audience. So if it's okay, I'm going to ask you about that. So both of you have talked about the challenges of incorporating taboo or sensitive content into your work, reclaiming ideas and notions that are problematic. So, you know, Nidhi, you talked about honor killing, and Zarka, I'm thinking about that moment in your show, although it's played for humor, but that notion of I'm reclaiming the crazy, which I think is so interesting given the ways that women are sometimes framed as hysterical or unstable. But so anyway, the first question asks about how you address really challenging content, especially when we live in such challenging times. So for both of you, the question is, do you think there are topics that are so raw in how recent or ongoing and traumatic they are that people are just not ready to laugh about it yet? And so the example they give is the so-called war on terror. Certainly I could see aspects of that, like the evacuation of Afghanistan. I think, what's happening in Palestine. I'm sure you can think of others, but so are there for the two of you topics that are you're just not ready to go there yet in a comedic sense?
That's a really interesting question. I suppose as a writer, I don't know, Zarka, if you feel the same way. Sometimes I don't always think I want to talk about this and that and this. You come to the page and you sort of, I'd always brainstorm, especially with We Are Lady Parts, and then I would, in a very open way, and then go over and be like, what am I saying? And then kind of see, it's not really self-censor, but just like kind of see what I'm feeling. I don't know because I think it's always dangerous when you preempt the audience and thinking, oh, they're not ready for this or they're ready for this. I think as writers, we always have to be kind of just driven by what feels truthful and right, and kind of use that as a barometer of like, and I felt like when I was, there's a song in episode 6 that's in episode 5 of Lady Parts that Sarah sings that's kind of like out there. I'm like, oh, I was quite nervous about that, but I'm like, oh, I can defend why I'm writing this. I understand why not only is it meaningful, but it's funny, and I felt comfortable and confident. So I always think it's like whether or not as a writer, if you feel strong and you understand why you're doing it, then it's okay. And I've never felt like I've ever correctly preempted how audiences are going to react to anything I've done. So yeah.
Yeah, the trouble is by the time you realize people are going to react, it's too late. And then you're like, oh, if I had just known. But the thing is, it's too late. So, I mean, you can't as an artist figure it out. Like, and I remember my husband, like I was in this position with Little Mosque on the Prairie. We have this production where we shoot, like we have 1/3 of the scripts done, and then we watch them play out, and then we keep writing, because the idea was that we would learn from the chemistry of the actors, and that ideas would come out from the actors themselves that we hadn't thought of when it was just on the page. And then, for example, a romantic possibility that we didn't consider, or a friendship possibility, or you have a minor actor that's just burning up the scenery that should become have a bigger role. And so we would actually change the scripts and adapt to what we were seeing happening. And it's a more rarer way of producing television now, because most places want you to have the whole script, the entire production written, and then you shoot, because it's cheaper and it's easier, and you don't have to have an entire writing team follow you all the way to production. But I remember when the criticism started coming and I had an opportunity to change things, my husband had given me the best advice. He's like, if you start to try to make everyone happy, you will actually make no one happy, because you will dilute the product to such a degree, because you have a point of view, and you've got to make sure that point of view makes it to the world. And if you start to dilute it, then it won't work. And so he was like, you just put on like a horse puts on blinkers, and just have a vision and go forward, and don't look around, because it's too distracting. Like my kids have said, do not read Goodreads reviews of your book anymore, because you go nuts and get upset and go, oh, I'm going to tell that person that they're wrong. And they're like, just let it go. You have put this piece of art into the world, and you have to let it go. And when I was writing Jamila Green Ruins Everything, I was like, a comedy about terrorism, that, because as a Muslim community, we had promised ourselves, never again are we going to associate the word Islam and Muslim with terrorism. But after ISIS came out, and all these pundits were saying Muslims, this is normal, this is what they gravitate towards, radical jihadis, like it's part of their blood and their culture and their inheritance. I was like, no, No. You know what? I'm going to show and prove to the world that this group started because of some other issues, and mainly because of botched American policy in Muslim lands. But the only way I can satirize ISIS is to talk about terrorism, and Muslims are going to have to be in the same sentence. And it'll be the first satire about ISIS. And is the world ready? I don't know. But I just kept writing and writing and writing, and then no one would publish it. And then all of a sudden, Trump got elected. And the whole narrative of danger shifted from Muslims to white people. And the whole issue of white terror and white supremacy and white nationalism rose in the media. And ISIS disappeared out of, the consciousness of people. And in came the KKK and the Proud Boys and all these horrible, white supremacist groups. And all of a sudden, people were willing to talk about the history of, American foreign policy and what it did to create groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And I don't think the book could have come out in any other time, but had I not allowed myself to write it, and had I stopped myself, it wouldn't have existed today when the time was right for it. And that now we can satirize this subject. And so my advice to people is just do it, just write and create. And when the time is right, it'll happen. Like it'll come out at the right time when the world is ready for it.
That's great. I think that's such helpful and empowering advice. I mean, for a couple of reasons. I think one, because I think you've said, and this is what we also see reflected for those of us who study communication, that you cannot always anticipate the audience's reaction. So when you say that, you're getting people who are very upset at the mosque because they think the content is so risque, I think many others would have read it very differently and thought that, in fact, this was a relatively family-friendly, safe kind of approach to telling the story. But obviously, we're all very different as audience members. And I think it's also really empowering advice, too, because I really related to what Nita was saying about, being a people pleaser and feeling as though there's something wrong if we're not telling stories the way people want to receive them. But part of being an artist is also making people feel uncomfortable, too. And so I think there's a lot of value in that. So our next question is actually very specific. So this is for you, Nita. So the question is, what was your inspiration for putting in poetry by Faiz Ahmed Faiz in one of the episodes?
Oh, yeah. Like I said, I grew up in a very kind of poetry loving family. Both my grandparents as well really loved it. And my grandfather on my mum's side, he probably was the most encouraging of me as a writer. When I would visit them in Islamabad, he'd always be like, show me your poetry. What are you writing? And was always reading all my short stories. And he loved Faiz Ahmed Faiz. He loved Faiz poetry. So he'd always be, reading it to me. And it was just a way to honor someone who had really lifted me up when I was, sort of exploring the notion of writing. And the piece from Faiz is just like this poem I kind of returned to when I was feeling low. It's about speaking and following your voice when you're nervous about it. And it just really spoke to not only what I was writing in the show, but also was something I leant on when I was feeling self-doubt. And it was also a way to honor my granddad, who is always super supportive of me being a writer, which again is like, as a Muslim man, and he's like wanting to read all my poems and my work, and is like been one of my greatest supports. So it was that really.
Well, that's great. I really love that, and I think that's one of the things that is really important about having more diverse perspectives in the writers' room, is that it's not just always about the actor, but it's also these little things that creep in. And I have to say, I'm not always incredibly knowledgeable about this, but I think others who are will sometimes say to me, I caught this snatch of Urdu poetry, or I caught this particular song, and this is what I used to listen to growing up. And so it is really meaningful for people. There's different ways of seeing your reality represented. And so I think that that's really important. So I'm not going to ask any more questions because I'm just looking at the time, but if it's okay, I'm just going to make a couple of quick comments and then we'll start to wrap up here. But I just wanted to say how much I appreciate this conversation. I think one of the things I was thinking of heading into this event is that a few years ago, Lena Waithe was in this big article that talked about the challenges of being a Black woman in the writer's room. And so listening to the two of you talk, I really appreciated the kind of challenges, although the systems might be different in the different countries. I appreciate some of the similarities that you're bringing up. Obviously, it's nuanced differently for Muslim women writers, but this idea that you can bring a diverse perspective into the writer's room, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the room is ready for it. And so that's where you'll get the questions about whether or not you can just write an honor killing storyline, because that's what people want to see. It's not funny, but it's funny that we keep getting the same questions, that this is the association that people have when Muslim women are in the room. And I also love the inspiration both of you are offering for people who maybe want to walk your path. I appreciate very much the very familiar notion that many of our parents or families are apprehensive about their children following a creative path because there's not a lot of models to follow for it. We go with what we feel is safe and familiar. For many of us, we come from families that haven't always known a lot of stability and safety and security. And so we're trying to carve a path that will allow for stability for the future. And so I think it's really nice for you to talk about how both of you were able to do this at different points in your lives. And I wonder if maybe, I hope that we're at a bit of a transition point with, you mentioned Ms. Marvel, having Canadian actors of color, of all different backgrounds who are being pulled out for these big projects. And so I don't know if we're at a big turning point, but I think certainly the work that both of you are doing is helping to demystify this career path for young people of color. So I think that that's great. So I just want to thank you both so much on behalf of the audience for sharing your experiences and being so candid about the good and the bad that come with being trailblazers as professionals who are breaking new ground, but having to challenge the ways that we're all socialized to not rock the boat. I found this to be so inspirational. I hope everyone else did too. I am very much looking forward to checking out more of your work. I'm very excited to hear from our other speakers and hear what they have to say and hear some of the similarities, but also their viewpoints. So I just want to remind everyone watching, Muslim Women Behind the Lens will be live streamed on Monday, March 16th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And that is featuring Nijla Momin from Jinn, Lena Khan from Never Have I Ever, and Iman Zawari, who is associated both with Americanish and, of course, with Zarka. So please do join us for that event, as well as our final one on May 29th at 1 p.m. At Eastern, and that is Acting Muslim, Representing Our Authentic Stories. And you can find more information on all of these at zarkanavaz.com. Today's event was recorded. I just want to mention that I know we've been getting some questions about that, and we will make that recording available when it's ready. In the meantime, we do encourage those of you who are in Canada, it's not available everywhere, but for those of you who are in Canada, please do check out episodes of Zarka free on CBC Gem. And so Zarka, I know you've been getting a lot of questions about accessing these episodes. Is there anything that you want to add about that?
I think you just have to download the app if you have a smart TV, or you can watch it on your phone or your laptop. You just have to do that. It's not on the linear CBC channels, just so people realize that. And if that's a confusing thing, just find someone very young in your household and repeat those words, and they will take care of it for you.
Well, I will just say I am not remotely tech savvy, and I was able to find content on CBC Gem, so it is doable. But I do encourage you to check that out. It is a great, very funny show. I was laughing out loud. But I just want to wrap up again by saying thank you again to our speakers, to the team that you don't see, but that is doing a lot of work in the background. Again, to our sponsors, of course, and to everyone who has taken the time to attend today. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.